Order. I will call first Kenny McCaskill to move the motion and then call the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Sir George. A pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It may seem strange to be debating energy debt with summer fast approaching, but whilst the weather has largely improved, the energy debt situation most certainly hasn't. It's not bright sunshine, but black clouds hanging over millions. Growing numbers in Scotland and across the UK are struggling and many drowning as debts mount, but energy needs remain constant. Ofgem has found that energy debt levels now stand at a staggering 3.1 billion. Let me repeat that. 3.1 billion, not million. Further, they've added that the average debt has increased by around 50% over the last 12 months, with the number of households in debt increasing by around 20%. The situation's worsening. National Energy Action, the fuel poverty charity, estimate that even with new price cap levels, about 6 million households in the UK will be in fuel poverty. The situation in Scotland, with its more northern latitude and harsher climate, is even more bleak. Energy Action Scotland suggesting that from the Scottish Government's House Conditions Survey of 2022, fuel poverty afflicted 31% of households. That's almost a third of people in an energy-rich land powering the UK economy living in fuel poverty. And that was 2 years ago. In northern areas and the islands, it was almost or even over 50%. These are the parts closest to the oil and gas fields, yet denied access to affordable fuel. The new bounty of renewable energy likewise adds to the perversity. Scotland is providing 124 billion kilowatt hours to be cabled south, enough to power Scotland's homes 12.5 times over. Yet many Scots can't afford to heat their own home. What an absurdity to be energy rich, yet your people feel poor. By all means.
And the Honourable Gentleman for East Lothian bringing this forward, and he's right to present the issue of fuel poverty. In England it's about 13%, and he mentioned that Scotland is 31%. In Northern Ireland, Mr Chairman, the fuel poverty stands at 22%, meaning that 10% of our wages go to pay fuels. Does the Honourable Member not agree that people need help? And just as he rightly says, because the summer months are coming, that's going to get better, it doesn't mean the problem is disappearing. And indeed, we must take more effective steps right now. And we do look to the Minister for those answers.
Thank you. I fully accept the member's intervention, and the issue is across the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, with the climatic matters worsening the situation in Scotland, but equally other factors affect other areas, and indeed, as I'll go on to say, the days of the summer months being some protection, I think, are long passing. What does it mean for those in debt? Real people, not statistics. Citizens Advice Scotland state the average fuel debt for someone seeking their help is around £2,300. That's just the average. For some it will be worse. That's also only fuel, and there may be other debts as they juggle finances trying to manage. Scope, the disability charity, during 2023 received 7,422 referrals to the Disability Energy Support Service, and of these, 364 were in debt. Disabled households require an additional £975 per month simply to have the standard of living of a non-disabled household, yet the average debt is over £1,100. According to Age Scotland, older people have been massively impacted. Their research highlights that the majority of over 50s in Scotland feel financially squeezed and are cutting back on essentials. Yet pensioners in Scotland have the highest rates of fuel poverty, with 36% in fuel poverty according to most recent data. Worryingly, 24% is classified as living in extreme fuel poverty, higher than any other household group. All statistics will have worsened as energy prices have risen and the general cost of living likewise increased. The perversity of choosing between heating and eating growing, not diminishing, and they're not just numbers or statistics, but human beings, even children. Indeed, while spring is usually a season for looking forward with anticipation, This one has also seen the heaviest rainfall ever recorded in many parts of Scotland. With that rain comes damp and likewise cold. The days might be getting longer, but the need for heating homes remained as vital as when the nights had been longer. Climate change is making our climate more changeable, but that simply makes it more challenging, as inclement weather straddles even supposedly moderate months, heating often a year-round requirement and not just for those unwell or housebound. The seasons turn and summer will be followed by autumn and then winter, exacerbating an already difficult situation, and the thought of colder months to come sending a shiver through many from fear, not cold. Energy just isn't about access to heat, but power, allowing the mother to power the washing machine to keep her kids clean and tidy, the parent to power the school laptop, ensuring those same children can achieve their full educational potential, individuals to charge their phones, to access employment opportunities benefiting not just themselves, but our society collectively. Rather than berating and punishing people for not being in work, maybe the Prime Minister would be better advised to assist them in achieving it. The need for power, even applying to those needing life-saving equipment. Ill health not only often keeps you housebound, but makes you more susceptible to the cold. Keeping warm is essential for recovery. Similarly, dialysis or oxygen aren't luxuries to prettify your home. They're essential for your very existence. That's why this debate is urgent. The time to act is now, not when winter's upon us. By then, the situation will be even worse for many, and tragically, may even be too late for some. As National Energy Action advised, not only are more falling into debt, but those already in debt are seeing their situation worsen. Only about 1/3 of that overall debt figure of £3.1 billion consists of debt where there is an arrangement to pay. That arrangement may be manageable for many, though for some it may prove too much as both energy and other costs increase. What happens then? For already 2/3 of that debt, over £2 billion, consists of what's termed arrears. That's defined as debt without a repayment arrangement, no plan of how to repay, struggling to meet current bills without even considering meeting arrears that have accrued. How do they get through this spring, let alone winter? For many, they see no way out of the morass facing them. It's why action is needed to address energy debt every bit as much as the continuing crisis of energy costs. Ofgem has called for inputs on debt and affordability, with submissions closing on 13th May. But Ofgem are a creature of statute. They can only do what they're authorised to do, and the parameters and final decision remaining with government. Another reason why this debate is apposite. It's not just that the situation is worsening, but the decisions must be made now. Those facing this crisis with the burden weighing them down are not the feckless or ne'er-do-wells who never seek to pay their way. Instead, it's the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. This isn't a won't-pay campaign, as I once ran in Scotland against Thatcher's poll tax. This is a simply can't-pay situation by those who just don't have the cash or wherewithal. For another cruelty for our energy market is that those with least pay most, hence facing the highest risk of debt, not just difficulty in paying their bills. Energy costs have increased for all, but the proportion paid by the poorest and most vulnerable is greatest. As National Energy Action have pointed out, outstanding charges have almost doubled over the past 5 years, with households now paying over £300 regardless of payment method. It's an energy poll tax that hits the poorest hardest. The billionaire with a swimming pool paying the same as the widow and her kids in a council flat. Charges also vary across the country, with those in colder Scotland paying a higher rate than here in London. Tariff prices are also highest for those least able to pay, standard credit being far more expensive than for those on direct debit. But for some, no other method is available. They're left paying more, yet from a smaller budget. Prepayment has seen tariff costs belatedly reduced and is now the cheapest tariff, but it can have other issues for those forced to pay by that means. And let's recall that the moratorium on forced installation of prepayment meters has ended. Now warrants are being obtained to force them on even those who do not want them. For obviously it suits suppliers who can monitor and even restrict consumption, even if more will simply be afflicted by that perverse euphemism of self-disconnection. A benign phrase, but a wicked outcome. It's not a voluntary choice, but imposed by financial circumstances. Lacking the funds to buy the card or pay for more credit, they simply go without. Let's also remember that putting people onto prepayment meters has other significant consequences. As Citizens Advice Scotland point out, firstly, it results in debt repayments being added to consumption charges. Folk pay more, but get less. Debt, not just standing charges, to be met before you even get a flicker. Secondly, they may not be able to switch supplier, even if lower tariffs are available. Now, the government will claim that energy prices have fallen. Of course, over the recent period, that is most certainly true. But the baseline is not last year, but when the energy crisis arose. Prices are now far higher than then. The supposed global issue of energy costs, whether through war in Ukraine or in other international pressures, has seen prices in the UK far higher than in other lands. All are suffering as a result, business or domestic customers, but it's the poorest and most vulnerable feeling the most pain. Moreover, while the energy price guarantee has dropped, let's not forget that there's been sleight of hand. Not only is the energy price guarantee predicated on the average costs, hence it takes no account of differing circumstances, whether that be climatic in northern parts or personal needs such as ill health. But the average consumption of energy used in formulating it was reduced, as it was stated that household insulation had improved. Of course, for many new, well-insulated homes, that is the case. But if you're in an older property, and whether you own it or you're a council house or housing association tenant, or with a private landlord, that in all likelihood won't apply. But your needs remain the same. It's why National Energy Action calculate that if it was calculated on the former assessment, the price cap would be £1,769, not £1,690 for the typical dual-fuel household. That's almost an additional £100 for those in the poorest housing stock to find. The price cap prior to the crisis arising for the typical dual-fuel household paying by direct debit was £1,138. It's now 56% higher, but costs have risen even more for those in harder-to-heat households or on higher tariff payment methods, making it even worse. Ofgem acknowledge that there's £3 billion of debt contained in the energy market. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition calculate that there are allowances in the energy price cap to service that debt, amounting to £1.5 billion per annum. That just pays for servicing the debt, not even reducing it. Can the Minister confirm if that is the case? If that is happening, how is it being calculated, collected and distributed? Where's the transparency? Are consumers paying for their suppliers' accrued debt? Surely we're entitled to know what we're paying for and what the big corporates are getting from us. In summary, we know there's a crisis at the moment and winter to come which could be harsh and cruel. So what is to be done? Firstly, a social tariff, once alluded to by ministers and standard in many lands, even those without the exorbitant prices we face, should be invoked. That will provide solace for the poorest and most vulnerable. Secondly, restore the moratorium on forced installation of prepayment meters. That is iniquitous and cruel. Thirdly, the Warm Home Discount Scheme requires reviewed and enhanced. Rather than the arbitrary issuing of payments to second homeowners, never mind those not requiring it, as was once done, it should be centred on those most in need, addressing hardship and mitigating even existing and even increasing debt. Current support at £150 is simply inadequate, and too many are missing out entirely, even though entitled and in need. It was, after all, £140 before the energy crisis arose and prices rocketed. It badly needs increased to reflect that. The Social Market Foundation has made proposals which the government would do well to adopt. Finally, as suggested by National Energy Action, there requires to be a debt write-off scheme. The amount owed and the numbers in debt are such that full repayment can never be made by many. The only way that much can be reduced is for support through matching payments being made. The details of the scheme can be discussed, but the principle should be non-negotiable. It needn't be a blank cheque for others simply to cease paying. It can be time-limited to debt incurred during this fuel crisis or other criteria. Banks were bailed out. PPE wastage, if not fraud, has been written off, and there seems unlimited funds for weapons of war, but not war on poverty. If assistance can be given to the few, then similar support should be provided for the many. In summary, Chair, energy debt levels are rising, and with winter looming, fears for access to warmth and power, as well as simply keeping body and soul together, are increasing. These are basic human needs and should be human rights. Action needs taken to ease the cost of energy and reduce the burden of debt for the poorest and most vulnerable. Will the Minister meet with me and representatives of National Energy Action to discuss this crisis? Even more importantly, will she address the perversity of fuel poverty in an energy-rich land?
The question is that the House has considered levels of household energy debt. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Howard, and it's a great pleasure to serve here under your chairmanship. And I would like to thank the Honourable Member for East Lothian for securing this debate on such an important issue. And this really is an issue which I care deeply about. The Honourable Member mentions what it's like to live in fuel poverty, and I can assure him that I personally understand exactly what that was like, having as a child, knowing the difficulty in terms of even using something as simple as a washing machine. And also latterly when my mother had COPD and had to make decisions around using oxygen. So I would just like to reiterate that I do fully understand the situations that we're talking about, which is one of the reasons why, as a Minister for Affordability, I really take this matter incredibly seriously. And as the Honourable Member has pointed out, on lots of levels, consumer energy debt has risen, of course, in previous years. And the Government recognises that this is an important and growing problem. Energy debt can harm consumers in several ways. It can encourage consumers to self-ration energy, leading to cold, damp homes, or indeed cause households to cut back in other ways. And the Government expects suppliers to do all they can to support customers in debt, particularly vulnerable customers. And I would encourage anyone who is concerned about keeping up the bills to contact their supplier. They should also contact organisations such as Citizens Advice Bureau, and who also may be able to provide support. Last year, I met with energy suppliers to outline our expectation that suppliers do all they can to support those in debt and to help other consumers avoid falling into debt. I also meet regularly with stakeholders like the Citizens Advice to discuss how we can work together on how consumers can be best supported. And I welcome the call for input from Ofgem on affordability and debt. And for the reasons that the Honourable Gentleman mentions and has set out, it is right that Ofgem take a detailed look at this issue. And I look forward to understanding Ofgem's next steps for how consumers can better be protected and to ensure the debt burden does not leave us in an unsustainable position. The Honourable Member also mentioned that despite high levels of consumer debt, the energy prices have fallen significantly since last year. And the price cap has fallen by nearly 60% since the price cap peaked last year, falling by £238 in April. And over the last 2 years, the Government has demonstrated its commitment to supporting vulnerable people with one of the largest support packages in Europe. Taken together, total support between 2022 and 2025 to help households with the cost of living has been worth over £108 billion, which is an average of £3,800 per UK household. Millions of vulnerable households have received up to £900 further cost of living payments, with an extra £150 to those eligible for disability benefits. And these payments were in addition to established financial support available to low-income and vulnerable households through the winter fuel payment and the cold weather payment, which provides £25 during very cold weather. And an extra cost of living payment was paid to pensioners' households worth up to £300 through the winter fuel payment. And the government continues to provide support through the Warm Home Discount, which provides low-income households with an annual of £150 rebate off their energy bill every winter. And whilst we are doing a lot to help households, I remain concerned that some customers remain in energy debt. Suppliers should do all they can to support these households and ensure consumers do not fall into debt. And last year, Energy UK announced a voluntary debt commitment with 14 energy suppliers. They collectively committed to go above and beyond current licensing conditions to help households with energy bill debt over winter. And these energy suppliers committed to provide immediate assistance to those in debt, as well as arming people with knowledge and resources to empower them to manage bills more efficiently. But this is an ongoing issue, and it's also important that suppliers provide quality customer service to support consumers before they fall into debt and quickly help those who are already in debt. The Honourable Member raised the issue of prepayment meters. And prepayment meters can, of course, be a useful tool for some consumers to manage their debt and for energy suppliers to manage the debt. However, it is really important that the rules around their use are sufficient to protect consumers and are properly enforced, and involuntary installations should only be used as a very last resort. And Ofgem has strengthened their licence conditions for suppliers to conduct involuntary prepayment meter installations, with exemptions in place for households with vulnerable individuals, such as people who are 75 or older. I also know the Honourable Member's constituents will have been in contact around standing charges, and standing charges remain a matter, as the Honourable Member will know, for Ofgem. And Ofgem recently launched a call for input on standing charges, and, which ended in January, and they received just over 30,000 individual responses. And this looks at how standing charges are applied to energy bills and what alternatives can be considered. And Ofgem is currently analysing these responses and will publish its response in due course. And in March, the Secretary of State and myself wrote to Ofgem outlining the government's expectation that standing charges should be kept as low as possible, or indeed reformed if necessary, to make them fairer for consumers. The government has already committed to further support for households as well. At the autumn statement, we announced the biggest increase in national living wage, which is worth around £1,800 for a full-time worker and will benefit around about 2.7 million workers. And we also announced the next generation of welfare reforms that will benefit payments increasing by 6.7% and pensioners by 8.5%. In the spring budget, we also cut national insurance by a further 2%. That means that a person on an average wage has the lowest personal effective tax rate since 1975. And we have also extended Household Support Fund until September 2024, with an additional £500 million in funding. And we have been working across government and with Ofgem and suppliers to better identify customers who are getting into problem debt and making sure that households are properly supported. I understand that this is a complex matter and one which is very important to the Honourable Member. Of course I will.
Whether she could clarify the position regarding whether there is any element within individuals' bills that is factored in by Ofgem that relates to the debt servicing of suppliers.
Thank you. The Honourable Member makes a really good point, and the Honourable Member will also know there was an announcement of a one-off price cap adjustment of £28 per household for direct debit and standard credit customers. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're looking at is looking at the whole standing charges system and seeing if it should indeed be reformed as a whole as well. I would also like to say to the honourable gentleman that, of course, I would be happy to meet. One of the things I'm always very keen to do is meet across parties, across departments, and also working together, for example, with DWP and other departments, and also with stakeholders, because together that is the only way that we can really consider tackling this issue. To reiterate, we must remember that these are individual people that we are talking about. This is individual lives that we are talking about. So, as I say, incredibly happy to meet and discuss this matter further. I also understand that this is a really complex matter and one which is very important to the Honourable Member, and indeed I know other members of across the House. And I hope I provided some reassurance in terms of the action that is being taken by government and Ofgem and suppliers to help all of consumers, and to give my assurance that as the Minister for Energy and Affordability, it is utmost on my mind. One of the things that we should never be doing is making vulnerable people more vulnerable. And I once again thank the Honourable Member for East Lothian for raising this debate.
So the question is that this House has considered levels of household energy debt. As many of that opinion say aye. I think I've detected an aye in there somewhere. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The order, the sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.